a wise older attorney when I first started out told me that you needed to have, as a practicing attorney, you needed to have kind of like a football team. You needed to have a short game, a medium range game, and a long bomb capacity. And what he meant was you needed to have all types of cases. You need to have the cases that bring you cash flow instantly, to the cases that you work on a little bit that might bring you a nicer fee, and then your long range cases that you can make a big fee out of. And so Legal Match has done all three of those things for me. Now, it's not exclusively my only way to attract clients. Obviously, you've got word of mouth referrals, which are always a good way to get clients. I'm involved in some other things but it's a nice complement to those marketing activities, because it keeps it keeps leads coming in, which is always a good thing. When you're talking to people who may be potential clients, you're fishing, or you're drilling for oil, or whatever metaphor you like to use, you're doing those things. And I've gotten cases from Legal Match that were simple, 3-digit fees to bigger cases where I had a six-digit fee. So it's good to satisfy that goal of having a short game, medium range game, and a long-term kind of Hail Mary game. I've gotten cases that were, the fee was in the 3-digit range, a $750 fee on a protective order or something like that, to all the way up to a civil case where I got a over $100,000 fee. So, if you get one of those civil cases, you've paid for Legal Match for, 20 years. So, and I know of a case that I got from Legal Match that garnered a 6-figure fee. So, I also have had several criminal cases where people were charged with pretty serious crimes, and they ended up paying legal fees of $20,000 to $30,000 to the firm. So, and I've had some custody cases that were, pretty big custody cases that yielded pretty big 5-figure fees too. So, anecdotally, without consulting my accountant and looking at everything, I can't tell you how much, but I can tell you it more than pays for itself, and it produces a good amount of leads that end up with being clients. I think that just generating leads. I think most lawyers will tell you, or at least in my experience, potential client, and counsel them, give them my counsel initially. I usually land that client as a long-term client, because I believe I have that ability. So it's the introduction that Legal Match does, as far as getting me to the clients. And then, like everything, if you do a good job for somebody that you got off a Legal Match, then they might become a word of mouth referral later to somebody else, and it just, it exponentially feeds upon itself. And it's not an immediate, I'm going to tell you right up front, it's not an immediate gratification. Some of it is when you get the client off a Legal Match, but a lot of times you have to talk to these folks. You have to cultivate that relationship before they have the confidence to hire you as a lawyer, just like anything else. But I've always said from the beginning of my practice 28 years ago, one dose of kindness and one being interested in somebody's case will pay dividends. It may pay dividends immediately, but a lot of times you have to wait, and they come back to you, and they're interviewing lawyers, and they're finding ways all over the internet to find lawyers. And so you have to be a little bit patient, but it does pay off. I think any sole practice or boutique law firm goes through this, but before Legal Match, there was these lulls of time where you wouldn't get any new leads or new calls. And so one of the things that I don't know how effective this is, but it at least makes you feel better, is there's always a lot of activity on Legal Match. So you can come in on a Monday morning and have 6 legal matches to respond to, whereas in the past, you might be in one of those lull periods, and for me, it's somewhat comforting to have people to call back. And a lot of those turn into clients, which is the best part of it, right? And the other thing I think that's good about Legal Match is you get, they tell you what their problem is. They tell you how they're going to pay you, and it also tells you their income level. And for my firm, because there's me, who has 28 years of experience, and my associate, who's a young attorney, we can focus in which attorney might give that person a call back based upon their income level and their ability to pay, and who they might be looking for. In fact, there's a question in Legal Match in the inquiry of what level of experience do you want? Well, at my firm, we can accommodate, the entry level attorney to the very experienced attorney, and that's very helpful when you're weeding through leads. The thing I think I like the best is the foreknowledge that it gives you before you call that client. You have the ability to kind of, weed out the things that you're not going to be interested in, and you have the ability to examine what their self-reported income is. Somebody who makes under $25,000 a year, who has a big custody case, is not likely to be able to afford a $3,500 retainer and a $325 an hour lawyer. They might be able to afford a $1,500 retainer from the associate and $165 an hour. And so you have this ability to kind of parse who calls who back and have some, for lack of a better term, intelligence on who you're talking to first. You also have the ability to look up their case before you call them, because you have their name. And I do that a lot. Somebody does a Legal Match and they're charged with a crime. I can go on our court network and look their case up and have some information about their case before I talk to them. Now, to me, that's a routine thing. To the client, they think you're brilliant if you already know about their case before you call them. So that's kind of a huge thing. So to that regard, I think it's a very helpful tool. I've had a few other lead generating systems, and I think it does better than the ones I've had, so I think it does a pretty good job. I've stayed with it. I've renewed my contract twice, I believe. So that tells you something. Because it creates more contacts with potential clients. I think anytime, it's up to the attorney to sell themselves and to actually land the client. But the more times you talk to people every day about your services, the better off you're going to be at getting more clients. So that's why I would recommend it. It will increase the activity and the call volume into your firm, the email volume. It generates leads. I think if an attorney is looking to complement their marketing and lead generation, it's a good thing. I think it's a very good tool that I use and have used for several years. I find I'm most effective when I immediately respond and then follow up with a phone call to the lead. If you let the leads sit, they grow stale. So it's you got to be Johnny on the spot. You got to call them back, respond to that lead, and try to cultivate that client immediately. Because most of the people on Legal Match that send in an inquiry have an immediate need. I'm probably pretty simplistic at this. I have, for each of my practice areas, I have a template response, and then I have a general response, because not everything fits within the cookie cutter. But if somebody's doing a custody inquiry, they're involved in a custody case with their kids, then I have one template email that goes out. If they have a divorce, I have another template that goes out. If they're a suspect of a crime, there's a template for that. If they're charged with a crime, there's a template for that. If they have a civil case, they usually get the general template that I want to talk to them, and that the first visit is free. So So you kind of cover your bases, and you can from your phone respond. We have smartphones now, so you can instantly respond to a legal match inquiry with these templates, and that's really handy. And it seems, the way that you write your own template, so it's coming personally from you, and you can incorporate things from your website, that you say to people. On your website, you can incorporate. I've done that. I've incorporated things from my website, my bio section in these templates. Not a whole long email or anything, but just, for example, on my divorce template, my website talks about divorce being, the trauma from divorce and how nobody gets married to get divorced. Well, that line alone is something I put in my template for my divorce, and it kind of incorporates it. So, when they get my response email, they get my website, so they can go look at my website and read more in depth about who they're meeting with or who they're going to talk to, because I put just enough in there to kind of tease them into learning more about me. And if you can get them to your website, then they're going to read more about you, and you have a better chance of landing that client. On the phone app, you get the lead on the phone app about, 5 minutes or so before you get the email. So it's pretty lightning fast when you get that. That I would consider that pretty fast to go straight to email, and then I can click on the link and respond, and I can do that all from my smartphone, which is pretty cool. Well, the first reason is I think you all called me and offered it to me, and then I started looking at it. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it seemed to be a good lead service, and it has been a good lead service. I probably have 5 to 10 new appointments a week at my office. Now, sometimes half of those are no-shows. We have to be honest about that. But out of the clients that actually come in, I usually sign up about 50% of them. So, it's all a numbers game. You have to meet with people. You have to give them the opportunity to come in and talk to you, and you have to have the opportunity to sell yourself as an attorney. And I think it gives you that ability. I would just stop my geographical area.